The auditorium was silent, every eye fixed on the gleaming piano under the stage lights. A young black girl walked toward it, her hands trembling, not from fear of the keys, but from the cruel laughter of the principal who had said, "If she plays, I quit." What he didn't know was that her family carried a legacy of music, generations of brilliance echoing through history. This moment wasn't just a performance. It was survival, dignity, and defiance wrapped into a single song. But would the world finally listen, or reject her again? Her name was Amara. To the world, she looked like just another student in a crowded high school. But behind her quiet smile was a world of sound, a gift that flowed through her veins. She came from a family where music wasn't just a hobby, it was a legacy. Her mother had been a concert violinist, her father a jazz saxophonist, and her grandmother one of the first black women to perform on some of the nation's grandest stages. At home, the walls pulsed with rhythm, and every evening felt like a private concert. For Amara, the piano was more than wood and strings. It was her sanctuary. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the noise of the world melted away. Music was her language, her power, her way of being seen in a place where her skin too often made her invisible. At school, however, life wasn't so harmonious. Whispers followed her in the hallways. Teachers sometimes overlooked her hand raised in class. Subtle glances told her she didn't fully belong. And still, she carried herself with quiet grace, believing that talent could cut through prejudice. So when the annual talent showcase was announced, Amara knew this was her moment. A chance to honor her family, to share her gift, and maybe, just maybe, to silence the doubts that clung to her every step. What she didn't know was that before she even touched the piano, someone in power had already decided her fate. Someone who believed that brilliance and blackness could never share the same stage. The night of the showcase arrived. Students hurried backstage, costumes rustling, instruments being tuned, voices whispering with excitement. For most, it was just another school event. For Amara, it was everything. A chance to let her music speak louder than the color of her skin. She had practiced until her fingers ached, until the piano itself felt like an extension of her soul. But as she stood behind the curtain, something cut through the buzz of the crowd. Laughter. Not the light laughter of joy, but sharp, mocking laughter. And then the words that felt like knives, carried across the stage. The principal, standing with a group of teachers, smirked and said, "If she plays piano, I quit." The teachers chuckled nervously, some looking away, others shaking their heads. Not one spoke up. Not one defended her. And though the comment wasn't meant for her ears, Amara heard every syllable. Her chest tightened. Suddenly, the piano, her safe place, her anchor, felt like a trap. She could have walked away. She could have let the humiliation swallow her. After all, how could she perform knowing the very leader of her school wanted her silenced? Still, she stepped closer to the stage, each footfall heavy as if dragging chains. The curtain loomed before her, and behind it, an audience waiting to judge, to cheer, or to sneer. When the previous act ended, applause filled the auditorium. The host called her name. Amara's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear. Her hands trembled, her knees weakened, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. But then she remembered her grandmother's words. "They cannot take what is already inside you. Play and let them listen." She walked onto the stage. A hush fell over the room. The bright lights blinded her, but she could still make out the principal's arms folded. A grin tugging at his lips, certain she would fail. She sat at the piano, her reflection staring back from the polished black surface. The first note trembled as her finger pressed the key. A murmur rippled through the audience, too soft, too unsure. She almost faltered. But then something within her ignited. The next notes poured out, stronger, fuller, cascading into a melody that gripped the auditorium like a storm breaking over silence. The audience leaned in. Some gasped. Others froze, unable to believe the power in her playing. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the force of her music. It was as if every wound, every slight, every whispered insult had been transformed into sound, raw, beautiful, undeniable. Still, Amara wasn't just battling the keys. She was battling the laughter still echoing in her mind, the image of her principal daring her to fail. With every crescendo, she pushed back against that weight, each chord striking like defiance, each trill like triumph. And just when the audience thought they had heard her peak, she soared higher. Her hands flew across the keys with impossible speed, weaving a tapestry of sound that no prejudice could unravel. But as the final note rang out, lingering in the silence, Amara froze. Would they applaud, or would the principal's laughter win? The room hung in suspense, caught between disbelief and awe, and in that moment, before the first reaction came, Amara realized something terrifying. The performance was only half the battle. The real test was still ahead. The silence after her final note stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Amara's chest heaved, her palms damp against the keys. She had poured everything she was into that performance, and yet the room seemed frozen, unwilling to react. Then slowly, applause began to rise from the back rows, scattered at first, then swelling into a wave. Students stood, parents cheered, and for a moment, it felt like victory, but not for the principal. His face darkened as though the sound of clapping was an insult aimed directly at him. He stormed onto the stage, cutting through the applause like a knife. Grabbing the microphone, his voice thundered, "That was nothing but noise! This is exactly why I said she didn't belong here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The audience shifted uncomfortably, but the principal pressed on, his words dripping with disdain. "Talent show? This is a school, not a circus. If this is what we celebrate, then standards mean nothing." Amara sat frozen, her heart splitting open. The very authority meant to nurture her gift was now using his power to destroy it, publicly. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the piano and never return, and yet, something stopped her. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, classmates on their feet, parents wiping tears, even teachers unwilling to meet the principal's eyes. For the first time, Amara realized this wasn't just about her. It was about every black child who had been told, "You don't belong," every dream dismissed before it had the chance to shine. Her fingers returned to the keys, and without a word, she began to play again, louder, fiercer, notes like thunder, chords like lightning drowning out the principal's voice. The crowd erupted, standing taller, clapping in rhythm with her music. It wasn't just a performance anymore, it was a rebellion, and as the principal stood fuming, powerless against the sound that filled the auditorium, one truth became undeniable. Amara had won the stage. But what would happen when the music stopped? When the final chord echoed into silence, the auditorium erupted. Students, parents, and even some teachers stood in thunderous applause. The noise rose so high it drowned out every cruel word the principal had thrown. Amara bowed her head, tears streaming down her face, not of defeat, but of release. For the first time, she wasn't just heard. She was seen. The principal stormed off the stage, his authority shaken, his prejudice laid bare for all to witness. In the days that followed, parents complained, students whispered, and the district began asking questions. His power wasn't untouchable anymore. But Amara didn't wait for justice to catch up to him. She already had her victory. Her performance became a story retold in classrooms and living rooms alike, a reminder that brilliance cannot be buried beneath hate. She continued to play, each performance carrying not only her own voice, but the voices of generations silenced before her. Music became her shield, her sword, and her declaration that no one, not even those in power, could define her worth. But this story isn't just about a girl at a piano. It's about every student who has been overlooked because of the color of their skin, every dream dismissed before it had the chance to bloom. It's about the weight of prejudice in places meant to nurture growth and the courage it takes to rise above it. Amara's song was more than music. It was proof that dignity, resilience, and truth are louder than hate. And now the question is yours. When you see racism, subtle or loud, hidden or public, will you sit in silence, or will you rise like Amara and let your voice be heard?